So just 5 days now until the 2018 Cheltenham Festival, and we'll continue our theme of ranking the races. That nearly slipped my mind then, which we've been doing for the past few days. And Jamie, you've agreed to look at your favourite Gold Cup renewals this century.
Yeah, we are emphasising this century. This is all about sort of personal experience as well, because of course, you've got your Desi's, your Dawn Runs, your Arkles, Lescargos, all the way back to Golden Miller, who won 5. It's not that we are overlooking or underrating them. It's just a case of this is very much a personal experience. Personal because it's my favourite Gold Cup renewals in my experience. You've got to experience them, you've got to feel them, you've got to live them in order to get a true appreciation of that. I am going to touch upon the great roll call of history in one of our top 5 that I've listed down. But just that starting point, I think a good cut-off point is 2000, the year 2000. I do remember some of the 90s renewals, but in actual fact, all of the top 5 that we've got here are beyond the year 2000. Very much a personal interpretation of how I reacted to these Gold Cups in particular. So it's not about ratings, it's not about winning margins, it's not about time records. It's just about my personal interpretation of my 5 favourite Gold Cups in my experience.
And I must admit, looking at the list, and people who are reading on the microsite as well will have the list in front of them, we've been spoilt for choice in the past 16 years or so.
Again, another thing we're going to touch on is the era of great chasers, and I feel that since 2000 we have certainly had at least one magical era of the staying chasers. So we're going to drag a lot of things in. We're going to try and reflect what the Gold Cup means as well, and the importance of the Gold Cup, sort of spin it round by looking at the winners into the race itself. But these are my top 5. As ever, agree, disagree, get in with your own favourites, who you think or who you feel is your favourite Gold Cup winner of recent times, not even of recent times, of all time. If you happen to be older than me, which probably isn't that many people around right now, certainly not a Timeform, then just tell us your favourite Gold Cup winner, and of course why, because one of the illuminating reasons is I'm going to tell you exactly why each one of these figures in my top 5. There is no right or wrong answer to this. It's just the criteria is your personal favourite, the Gold Cup that hit you the most, and the reasons why that is. I've got my top 5, starting with quite a recent one.
Very recent, and 2016.
2016 renewal, number 5 on my ranking the racings for the Gold Cup is Don Cossack. And I think this is all about recognition and the importance of the Gold Cup. Horses need the Gold Cup more than Gold Cup needs any particular horse, and that tells us of the power and the prestige of the Gold Cup. Really good case in point here with Don Cossack, who Timeform rated in the 180s, a proper top-class chaser. But he never really had that full recognition because he'd never won a race such as the Gold Cup. This was the season, 2015-16, in which he fell in the King George at Kempton, when he was involved at least in that memorable 3-way battle for the King George. He tipped up 2 out. We were still of the opinion that he was the best horse in that race, but we needed Don Cossack to prove himself, because we thought and we believed that he was the best chaser around. And that's what the Gold Cup should be. The Gold Cup should be a recognition of the best staying chaser around, and that's why it was so important that Don Cossack did what he did at Cheltenham. Now, in terms of the race itself, there were only 9 runners that year. It was a small field, what we used to for the Gold Cup, but it did contain proper horses. Hennessy winner, Lexus winner, King George winner, last year's runner-up. So everyone was there, and Don Cossack was really majestic through that race. He more or less had all bases covered at all times, cue card tipped up of course, but the feeling amongst us was that this was finally the recognition that Don Cossack deserved and warranted. And that was his last race as well, Nick. Never raced again after that because of injury, and the rating that he ran to and the way that he did it that year really fostered the what-if factor. If he hadn't have been injured, he could easily have won 1, 2, 3 Gold Cups even. So the importance of the Gold Cup on a horse's CV, this is really important, and it was really significant and meaningful that Don Cossack got that, and that's why the 2016 renewal won by him is number 5 on my top 5 of modern day Gold Cups.
I was just about to ask you, actually. I think you answered it really. I think he was 8 when he won the Gold Cup. Could we have been looking at a serious contender this year if he was still around us?
Exactly, yeah. You look at last year's renewal won by Sizing John, you look at the sort of make and shape of this year's field, And even though there's lots of plots and subplots, lots of power players in there, there's not a Don Cossack in terms of ratings. And that's why I mentioned that what-if factor. We could easily be sat here talking about Don Cossack being on the precipice of winning 3 Gold Cups. But that wasn't to be. But that's why it was so important that day, in 2016, Don Cossack turned it on and showed the world what he could do. And when history sort of judges Don Cossack, all he needs to do is point to that Gold Cup and say, that's what I did. And because of the power and prestige of the Gold Cup, we're all aware of his brilliance.
Now, number 4 on your list, I remember sneaking out of class early to watch this one. Back to 2008 and a horse known as the Tank.
Well, I said about Don Cossack that the Gold Cup doesn't define horses. But if a horse ever did define the Gold Cup, then I think it is Denman. And this was an unusual year in that probably part of the reason why you sneaked out of class was because there was an awful lot of noise and hype around this particular Gold Cup. It was billed as this head-to-head between 2 giants of chasing, both from the same stable, Courtauld Star and Denman. Courtauld Star, he didn't really run up to his 100% best. But part of the reason, I think, why he didn't was because that he was just strangled at every stage in that race by Denman. And even though the figures and the facts and the figures perhaps don't prove the point necessarily, there's just a feeling in me, Nick, and perhaps you were watching it, that I can't think of many horses who would have beaten Denman that day.
No.
He was so brutal and so devastating in the way that he went through that 2008 Gold Cup that I just got a feeling that there aren't many horses before or since who could have really lived with him that day. So Denman was he was a staple throughout an era, a magical era of the Gold Cup, and it was so significant and so meaningful that he managed to win that in 2008. So with Don Cossack, it was almost a life's work that had been building up to that point. With Denman, it was just a case of grabbing the race by the scruff of the neck and making it his. And sort of for that reason alone, that virtuoso performance by Denman, he's number 4 on my top 5 list of modern day Gold Cups.
And I suppose there's a recurring theme here as well, because Denman, I know he came back from it, but he suffered a big problem.
Yeah.
And could he have won multiple Gold Cups?
Exactly. So the way that he was a little bit unlucky in the era he was in, the horse he was up against. We will naturally come on to a couple more of those in our top 5 list, but he was sort of the right horse in the wrong time in the case of his own injuries, which meant that he struggled to recapture that brutal brilliance on some occasions. We did see it on others, but also that he was in the middle of perhaps the hottest period for staying chasers that certainly I can remember since I've been at Timeform. So again, in terms of personal experience, Denman was a bit of a one-off for me, for how a Gold Cup can be won, for how a horse can grab it and smother the opposition in the way that he did. And of course, not many of these horses on our top 5 list have a nickname, and the Denman does.
Yeah,
we only have to refer to him as the Tank, and everyone knows who we're talking about.
And we've talked about what-ifs for the first 2 on your list, and at number 3 there's a horse that they're all trying to live up to in Best Mate.
Yeah, so number 3 on my list is, in terms of performance, he'd be behind both Don Cossack and Denman. But in terms of history, this is why Best Mate is number 3 on my list, focusing in particular on that 2004 renewal, which was the 3rd straight win for Best Mate. Now, I said at the top about the criteria with which I'm judging the top 5 Gold Cup renewals in my experience. Of course, I, and certainly you, have certainly heard of Golden Miller, Cottage Rake, Lescargo and Arkle, of course. And the reason why they are still household names and still familiar names to you and I, even though we didn't live through that time, is the fact that they're multiple winners of the Gold Cup. The fact that you look down the roll call of the Gold Cup history, and when a horse appears 2 or even 3 times, or 3 times in a row like Best Mate did, then you know that you are in the realms of something very, very special indeed. So racing sort of provides moments, shared moments that we can all come together and all witness and all enjoy and all participate in. But every now and then, that moment is not just in the here and now, it's in historical terms. And for Best Mate to win that 3rd Gold Cup, still, if I shut my eyes now, I can hear Simon Holt shouting 3 Gold Cups at the end, because he reflected. Commentator's job is to tell you what's going on. It's also the best commentators duty to reflect how you feel as you're watching it. And Simon Holt's cry of 3 Gold Cups at the end of that was really what everyone else thought. So in terms of ratings, Best Mate isn't in like the top 10 even, I'd say, of Gold Cup performers in history, despite winning 3. But the fact that he won 3 was so meaningful, so significant. Back to the point you made, Nick, about, we talked about Don Cossack and Denman. Their fragility in some ways highlights the difficulties of keeping a horse sound, of keeping a horse at a boil, of keeping a horse coming back year on year as Best Mate did. So a real flashpoint in history, in years, in centuries to come. People will still look at that and say, wow, that Best Mate must have been some horse, because they will see 2002, 2003, 2004, all Gold Cups won by Best Mate.
Now, at number 2, I think this would actually be my number 1. There's so many subplots in this renewal that it was just breathtaking.
So we're back to that point about the era in which these horses in. Now, the duty, number 1 of the Gold Cup, is to bring together the best staying chasers of that season, to sort out who's the daddy amongst those who've been through that campaign and shown their wares in the several months beforehand. But the very best Gold Cups bring together the best horses from several seasons, and this was a remarkable renewal in 2011 because we had not 1, not 2, but 3 previous Gold Cup winners in that race, and that's why it was so magical going into it and so memorable coming out of it. And of course the way that the race developed as well, that we had Denman and Corto Star making their moves, but right behind them with the younger legs was 6-year-old Long Run. And this was, for Long Run, the start of a journey which perhaps never hit the heights which you'd have expected to after the way he won that 2011 Gold Cup, but still, as a culmination, as a collection, as a real classifying point to represent the magical era of staying chasers that we were living in, that 2011 renewal was remarkable. Just to sort of put a little extra flesh on the bones as well, I've talked a lot about the horses involved, and that you hopefully get a real sense of why that Gold Cup was so special. Imperial Commander, Denman, Corto Star, all overturned by the up-and-coming Long Run. But it was also, to this day, the fastest Gold Cup time that's been recorded. That is still a track record for the Gold Cup, and that means something, obviously, when you think about the horses involved and the history the Gold Cup's got. So, in terms of a race, in terms of a memorable race, in terms of the stories beforehand and the way that we were looking forward to it, and then the way that it all unfolded, that 2011 Gold Cup won by a Long Run would be, for you, and for many people at home, their number 1 Gold Cup of modern times.
It will take some beating. The excitement I got when Denman and Corto turned corner for home, old sloggers ready to battle it out one last time. It was something else. It really was. It
was spine-tingling, wasn't it? And that is the beauty of racing, is that it should affect your emotion and not just your bank balance as well. It really should. And that was a stirring Gold Cup from start to finish. And by start, I mean probably the 2 or 3 months beforehand, all the way to the finish. It never let anyone down. And don't forget that Corto and Denman were both 11 years old by then. And they really added to that drama and the dimensions of that Gold Cup, even though effectively they were past the prime.
It was Rocky Balboa and Ivan Drago, and then you had Adonis Creed ready to...
I wish I hadn't thought of that.
But whilst me and Plenty Watching will have that 2011 as their favourite, it's a game of opinions. Plenty will have this one that you've picked as their favourite too.
Yeah, so my number 1 in the Gold Cup, ranking the racing's bracket since 2000, is Corto Star in 2009. And I was thinking about this, and the very sort of initial point is that when we were discussing that we'll do this for the Gold Cup, this was the first race that came into my mind. And when I think of the Gold Cup, it is the first renewal that comes into my mind. It's the first on the YouTube playlist in my mind at that queue. And it's all because this, for me, is the benchmark of brilliance for a Gold Cup. This is what a Gold Cup horse should look like, should act like, should win like. Because Cheltenham is about the betting and the boozing. Of course it is. We're going to enjoy that. Everyone at home who's watching is going to enjoy that. But it is about sporting arena and sporting greatness. And you want at least 1 point in the week for your socks to be absolutely knocked off and say, wow, that is something brilliant. And Corto Star in 2009 was absolutely brilliant. So I think that Kauto Star himself, for many people, I think he's probably the Arkle of a generation. That people will talk about Kauto Star as older people will talk about Arkle, this unusually freakish good horse. And we're up to that point as well of Sprinter Sacco will be remembered by people as the best chaser. He's our best chaser of the modern era. But people really appreciated him more when he'd been on the canvas and got back up again. And Kauto Star, this was 2 years after his first win, when he looked to have the world at his feet. And there'd been a few mishaps between that 2007 win and the 2009 win, which meant that there was some question mark about the validity of Kauto Star being classed as an all-time great chaser. But the 2009 renewal put a stop to all that. And just to put some flesh on the bones, just in power terms, in ratings terms, the third horse that day, Nick, Exotic Dancer, the performance he produced that day would have won him probably 8 out of 10 Gold Cups. But ahead of him was Denman, and then 13 lengths ahead of him was the mighty Kauto Star. And it was just a brilliant performance of control, of power, of brilliant jumping, of perfection. This was probably as close as you'll ever get to chasing perfection. So for all those reasons, the star quality that the Gold Cup needs in order to sustain its status, there's one star that stands out in modern times, and that's Kauto Star.
Can't argue with that. He was a one of a kind, I suppose, Kauto Star, and
Yeah.
a worthy number one. And whilst I've got you, we'll be back on Facebook Live in a couple of hours' time for Q&A.
Yeah, about 6 o'clock.
Yes,
all being well, if the technology works as well. So if you're watching, get involved, get your questions in. We'll try and answer as much as we can. And I am Britain's leading blackbird as well, so I've collected all the information from not just the Timeform previews, but other previews at which I've either appeared or looked at from afar. And we'll talk about Cheltenham, all things you like. And if you want to tell us or tell me your favourite Gold Cup horse, do that. But my top 5 in ranking the Gold Cup race in the modern era is number 5, Don Cossack, number 4, Denman in 2008, number 3, Best Mate for that 3 Gold Cups in 2004, number 2, Long Run in that memorable renewal, which really marked a magical era in staying chases. But at number 1, it's Kauto Star. 2009 was about as close to chasing pornography as you're going to get.
And on that note, we'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.